The telegram arrived on the muddiest day of spring in 1878, while Abigail James swept the last of winter's dust from her small seamstress shop in White Oaks, New Mexico Territory. Her hands trembled as she read the words that confirmed what she had feared for months. Her husband of 3 years had been killed in a mining accident in Colorado, leaving her alone in a town that had already begun to whisper behind her back. Rain pounded against the windows as Abigail folded the telegram and tucked it into her pocket. She was 23, widowed, and living in a frontier town that had little patience for a woman's independence. The whispers had started even before Samuel's death, hushed words about her barrenness, her outspoken nature, and her friendship with the local Mescalero Apache women who taught her their language and healing ways. Mrs. James. Sheriff Donovan knocked at her door, his expression somber beneath the brim of his rain-soaked hat. "Just heard about Samuel. My condolences." "Thank you," Abigail replied, her voice steadier than she expected. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "I don't mean to add to your troubles, but Mr. Thornton's asking about the rent. Says you're 2 months behind." Abigail swallowed hard. "Business has been slow. The stage from Santa Fe brought new fabric last week. I thought I'd have enough orders by now to cover it." "Well, folks are talking, Mrs. James. Some say it ain't proper you running this place alone. Others—" He trailed off. "Others say what, Sheriff?" Her blue eyes met his directly. "Nothing worth repeating, madam." But his glance around her shop, with its mixture of traditional fabrics and native-inspired designs, told her enough. After the sheriff left, Abigail pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. "Damaged goods," she whispered, repeating what she'd overheard Mrs. Peterson say at church last Sunday. The word stung, but she straightened her shoulders and returned to her work. She had survived worse than small-town gossip. Across town, Quentin Galloway dismounted his horse in front of the Silver Dollar Saloon, rain dripping from his duster as he tied the animal to the hitching post. At 32, he'd spent 15 years driving cattle, fighting in the war between the states, and most recently, working as a ranch foreman outside Santa Fe. Now, he had come to White Oaks with his life savings and a dream of something better than the transient existence he'd known. "You must be Galloway," called a portly man hustling toward him with an outstretched hand. "Marshall Williams. Got your telegram last week." Quentin nodded, shaking the man's hand. "The ranch still available, the old Harding place. Sure is. 15 miles out of town, good water rights, decent grazing. Needs work, though. Previous owner let things go after his wife died. Just warning you locals call it cursed." Quentin smiled slightly. "I don't put much stock in curses, Marshall. Smart man. Say, you got family coming?" "No, sir." "Just me," the marshal chuckled. "Brave man taking on that spread alone, or foolish. Wouldn't be the first time I've been called either." Quentin adjusted his hat. "Is there someone in town who could mend these clothes? Been on the trail too long." "The widow James runs a shop on Main Street. Fine seamstress, but—" The marshal lowered his voice. "Town's divided on her. Some say she's got strange ways, spends time with the Apaches, couldn't give her husband children. Now he's dead and folks wonder if there's something unnatural about her." Quentin's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough of frontier justice and prejudice during his years on the trail. "Sounds like she's just trying to make a living like the rest of us." "Maybe so." The marshal shrugged. "Rooms waiting for you at the boarding house. We can ride out to the ranch tomorrow if the rain lets up." After settling his belongings in the sparse room, Quentin headed back into the mud-slicked street. The seamstress shop was easy to find, a narrow storefront with clean windows and a hand-painted sign that read A. James, Fine Sewing and Alterations. The bell jingled as he entered. The shop smelled of cotton, lavender, and something unfamiliar, perhaps herbs. A slender woman with auburn hair pulled back in a practical knot looked up from her work. "Good afternoon," she said, setting aside a piece of embroidery. "Can I help you?" Quentin removed his hat. "Madam, I need some repairs." He gestured to the worn cuffs of his shirt and the tear in his duster, "and perhaps some new shirts if you have cloth." Abigail's eyes assessed him quickly, trail-worn but clean, his bearing suggesting military service, his eyes direct but not presumptuous like so many men who entered her shop. "I can help with both," she replied, reaching for a measuring tape. "When would you need them?" "No particular rush." "I'm buying the Harding Ranch. Need to see what shape it's in before I know how long I'll be in town." Something flickered in her eyes. "The Harding place, that's ambitious for one man." "So I've been told." He studied her as she noted his measurements, noticing the shadows beneath her eyes and the slight tremble in her fingers. "I'm Quentin Galloway. Abigail James." She didn't offer her hand, maintaining a professional distance. "If you leave those items needing repair, I can have them ready by tomorrow afternoon. The new shirts will take 3 days." "Fair enough." He placed his duster and 2 shirts on the counter. "What do I owe you?" Abigail calculated quickly. $2 for the repairs, 4 for each new shirt. He counted out the money, adding an extra $1. When she looked at him questioningly, he said, "For quick service." Their fingers brushed as she took the coins, and Quentin noticed her wedding band. "My condolences about your husband, Mrs. James. The marshal mentioned it." Her expression cooled slightly. "I'm sure he mentioned many things, Mr. Galloway. Nothing worth repeating." He smiled slightly, echoing the sheriff's words from earlier. A hint of surprise crossed her face, followed by a cautious nod. "Tomorrow afternoon, then." As Quentin left the shop, he couldn't help but glance back through the window. Abigail had returned to her sewing, her profile illuminated by the gray afternoon light, a picture of quiet determination in a town that seemed to have already judged her. The next day dawned clear, allowing Marshal Williams to show Quentin the ranch property. The main house was solid but neglected, the barn needed a new roof, and the fences required extensive repairs. But the land was good rolling grassland with a year-round creek and enough timber for building. By mid-afternoon, Quentin had signed the papers and paid cash, becoming the new owner of the Harding Ranch. "You'll need help," the marshal said as they rode back to town. "Miguel Ortiz and his sons do good work. They helped build half the town." "I'll speak with them," Quentin replied, thinking of the supplies he would need and the cattle he planned to purchase. When they reached town, Quentin headed directly to the seamstress shop. Abigail was helping an elderly woman select buttons when he entered. Both women glanced up, the older one narrowing her eyes at him before turning back to Abigail. "Remember what I said, dear," the woman murmured, patting Abigail's hand. "My nephew just arrived from Denver. Very respectable position with the mining company." "Thank you, Mrs. Hollister," Abigail replied politely. "I'll consider it." After the elderly woman left, casting another suspicious glance at Quentin, Abigail retrieved his repaired clothing from a shelf. "Your shirts will be ready tomorrow," she said. "I found some good cotton that should hold up well on a ranch." Quentin examined the repairs, nearly invisible stitching that would add years to the garment's life. "Excellent work, Mrs. James. Thank you." She hesitated, then asked, "Did the ranch meet your expectations?" "It needs work, but the bones are good." He leaned against the counter. "Actually, I could use your help with something else. The house needs curtains, bedding, that sort of thing. I wouldn't know where to start." Abigail looked surprised. "Surely one of the other merchants. I'd prefer someone with taste," Quentin interrupted smoothly. "And someone who won't charge me double because I'm new in town." She studied him, clearly trying to determine his motives. Finally, she nodded. "I can help with that. When would you like to discuss the details? I'm having dinner at the hotel restaurant. Would you join me?" "Strictly business, of course." He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the quick calculation of how such a public meeting might be perceived in a town already gossiping about her. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Galloway, but perhaps it would be better to discuss this here. Tomorrow morning." Quentin nodded, understanding her caution. 9 o'clock. That would be fine. As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Mr. Galloway, congratulations on your purchase. The Harding place has good water even in the driest summers," he smiled. "Good to know. Thank you, Mrs. James." That evening, as Quentin ate dinner alone in the hotel restaurant, he observed the town's dynamics. Groups of miners, merchants, and ranchers clustered at different tables, their conversations flowing freely until he walked past. He caught fragments of speculation about his intentions, his background, and his interest in the cursed ranch. At a corner table, he noticed Mrs. Hollister dining with a stiff-looking young man he presumed was the nephew from Denver. They were joined by Sheriff Donovan and his wife, all four heads bent in conversation that occasionally turned toward Quentin with poorly disguised curiosity. The next morning, Quentin arrived at Abigail's shop to find her arranging bolts of fabric on a table. She looked up with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Galloway. I've gathered some samples that might work for your house." She gestured to the fabric's sturdy cottons in practical colors, nothing fancy but all of good quality. "These look fine," he said, running a hand over the material. "I trust your judgment." Abigail nodded, taking measurements and making notes. "How many windows in the main house?" 8, plus doors for the kitchen and main room." As they discussed the details, Quentin observed how her professional manner softened when she spoke of colors and textures. There was clearly more to Abigail James than the town's whispers suggested. "If I may ask," he ventured during a pause, "how long have you been in White Oaks?" Abigail glanced up from her notepad. 3 years. My husband came for the mines, I followed." Her tone was neutral, but he sensed the story was more complicated. "And before that, Boston originally, then Denver." She continued writing, not inviting further questions. Quentin shifted topics. "The marshal mentioned you sometimes work with the Mescalero Apache." Her pencil stilled. "Did he now?" It wasn't a question. "I've had dealings with various tribes during my time on the frontier. Always found it beneficial to maintain good relations." Abigail studied him, weighing his words. "The women trade with me occasionally. They've taught me about local plants that produce natural dyes. In return, I've shown them some sewing techniques." Her chin lifted slightly. "Some in town disapprove." "Some people disapprove of anything unfamiliar," Quentin replied. "I'd be interested in seeing these natural dyes sometime." Before she could respond, the door opened, and Sheriff Donovan entered with Mrs. Hollister's nephew. "Morning, Mrs. James," the sheriff said, his eyes moving between her and Quentin. "Just showing Mr. Peterson here around town. He's considering investing in the area." "How nice," Abigail replied with a politeness that didn't reach her eyes. Peterson stepped forward, removing his hat. "Mrs. James, my aunt speaks highly of your skills." His gaze lingered on her face in a way that made Quentin bristle. "Your aunt is very kind," Abigail said. "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but Mr. Galloway and I are discussing a business matter." "Of course," the sheriff replied, though neither man moved toward the door. "Peterson here is staying through the summer. Perhaps you might show him some of the local sights, Mrs. James. A widow needs companionship, after all." Quentin saw Abigail's knuckles whiten around her pencil. "I believe Mrs. James can decide for herself what she needs, Sheriff," Quentin said quietly. The silence that followed was tense until Peterson cleared his throat. "Another time, perhaps. Good day, Mrs. James," he nodded to Quentin Galloway. After they left, Abigail released a slow breath. "Thank you. For what?" Quentin asked. "For not assuming I need rescuing or guidance." She returned to her notes. "Now, about these curtains. I can have them ready in 2 weeks. Will that suit your timeline?" "Perfectly," he replied, admiring her composure. "I'll be bringing in cattle next month once the fences are repaired." They finished their business, and as Quentin prepared to leave, he hesitated. "Mrs. James, I'll need help at the ranch. Someone to cook, keep house. Would you know anyone looking for such work?" Abigail considered. "Clara Wilkins might be interested. Her husband died in the same accident as mine. She has 2 children to support. Would you ask her for me? I'll pay fair wages." "I'll speak with her today," Abigail promised. Over the next few weeks, Quentin divided his time between the ranch and town. The Ortiz family proved invaluable, helping repair the barn and fences. Clara Wilkins, a quiet woman with deep laugh lines and capable hands, agreed to cook and clean 3 days a week, bringing her children 9-year-old David and 7-year-old Emma, who quickly became fascinated with ranch operations. Each time Quentin visited White Oaks for supplies, he stopped at Abigail's shop under the pretense of checking on his order. Their conversations gradually extended beyond business, discovering shared interests in books and music. He learned she had been educated at a women's seminary in Massachusetts, unusual for a frontier wife. She discovered his service in the Union Army and his self-taught knowledge of ranching gained through years of working for others. What neither mentioned was the increasing gossip that followed Quentin's frequent visits to her shop. Mrs. Hollister and her circle made their disapproval clear, suggesting that a respectable rancher should be calling on unmarried girls from good families, not a widow with strange ways. One afternoon in late April, Quentin arrived at the shop to find Abigail with a cut on her cheek and a determined set to her jaw. "What happened?" he asked, closing the door behind him. "Nothing of consequence," she replied, handing him the package of finished curtains. "Some boys thought it amusing to throw stones at my window." Quentin felt anger rising. "Did you tell the sheriff? To what end? He'd say they were just being boys." She touched the cut gingerly. "It's not the first time. Because of your friendship with the Apache." Abigail looked at him directly. "Because I don't fit neatly into what this town expects of a widow. I don't wear black anymore. I run my business without male supervision. I learn from people the town considers savages." She straightened some fabric with sharp movements. "And now I apparently entertain a bachelor rancher too frequently for proper society's comfort." Quentin stepped closer. "I've added to your troubles." "You're merely their newest excuse," she said with a tired smile. "They called me damaged goods long before you arrived, Mr. Galloway." The raw honesty in her voice struck him. "Quentin," he said quietly. "My name is Quentin." A moment passed between them, something unspoken but palpable. "Abigail," she offered in return. Before either could say more, the door opened and Clara Wilkins entered with her children. She stopped when she saw them standing close together, then quickly composed her expression. "Mrs. James, I've brought that mending you asked about," Clara said, gesturing to the bundle in her arms. "Mr. Galloway, David has been asking when the new calves might arrive." Quentin smiled at the boy, whose eyes shone with excitement. "Next week, if all goes well. Perhaps you and your sister would like to help name them." As the children chattered eagerly about potential calf names, Clara drew Abigail aside, speaking in low tones. Quentin couldn't hear their words, but he saw concern in Clara's expression and a flash of vulnerability in Abigail's before she masked it with a smile. After Clara and the children left, Abigail seemed distracted. She wrapped the curtains carefully in brown paper, tying the package with string. "Is everything all right?" Quentin asked. "Clara was warning me," Abigail replied, her voice matter-of-fact. "The town council is meeting tonight. Apparently, my situation is on the agenda." "What situation?" "My lease. Mr. Thornton owns this building and several others on Main Street. He's suggesting that allowing a single woman to operate a business without male oversight sets a poor precedent." She finished with the package, pushing it toward him. "He has 3 unmarried daughters, you know, all accomplished seamstresses." Quentin's jaw tightened. "That's not right." "No," she agreed, "but it's legal and common." She met his eyes directly. "This is why I cannot afford to give this town any more reasons to question my propriety, Quentin. Your friendship has been unexpected and valued, but perhaps we should be more circumspect." The dismissal was gentle but clear. Quentin took the package, understanding her position even as he chafed against the unfairness of it. "I respect your decision," he said finally, "but know that I'm not easily deterred by small-minded gossip." A genuine smile touched her lips. "I've noticed that about you." As May turned to June, Quentin threw himself into ranch work, bringing in a small herd of cattle and hiring 2 cowhands to help manage them. He visited town less frequently, and when he did, he kept his interactions with Abigail brief and businesslike, mindful of watching eyes. From Clara, who continued working at the ranch 3 days a week, he learned that the town council had extended Abigail's lease for only 3 months instead of the customary year. It was clear they were hoping to pressure her into either remarrying or leaving White Oaks entirely. One evening, as Clara prepared to leave after cooking dinner, she lingered at the kitchen door. "Mr. Galloway, I hope you don't mind my speaking frankly." Quentin looked up from the accounts he was reviewing at the table. "Not at all, Mrs. James saved my family after John died," Clara said, twisting her apron in her hands. "The mining company gave us nothing, said the accident was John's fault. Samuel James was the foreman, and he knew that wasn't true. He and Abigail took us in until I could find work." Quentin listened, sensing there was more to the story. "After Samuel died, Abigail continued helping us, teaching me to sew so I could take in mending." Clara's eyes were earnest. "The things they say about her in town, about her not being able to have children, about her learning Indian ways, their cruel lies meant to isolate her." "I never believed those rumors," Quentin assured her. Clara nodded. "I know that, sir. I also know how you look at her." She straightened her shoulders. "She's alone against the whole town now. Even Sheriff Donovan, who used to be fair-minded, has joined with Thornton since his daughter started walking out with Peterson." Quentin considered this information. "Thank you for telling me, Clara." After she left with her children, Quentin sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold, then crimson, then purple. He had come to White Oaks seeking a fresh start, a place to put down roots after years of wandering. Instead, he'd found himself increasingly preoccupied with a woman whose quiet strength and dignity in the face of prejudice had captured his admiration. More than admiration, if he was honest with himself. The next day, Quentin rode into town determined to speak with Thornton. He found the businessman at the bank where he served as a director. "Mr. Galloway," Thornton greeted him, his smile not reaching his eyes. "What can the bank do for you today?" "I'm not here about banking," Quentin replied. "I understand you're Mrs. James's landlord." Thornton's expression cooled. "That's correct. A temporary arrangement until a more suitable tenant can be found. I'd like to discuss purchasing the building." The banker's eyebrows rose. "I wasn't aware you had interest in town properties, Mr. Galloway. The building isn't for sale." "Everything has a price," Quentin countered, "and I'm prepared to pay generously." Thornton studied him, calculation replacing surprise. "May I ask why you're so interested in that particular property?" "Business diversification," Quentin replied smoothly. "It's a good location." "Indeed." Thornton leaned back in his chair. "However, I have other plans for that space. My daughters have considerable talent with a needle, you know, proper young ladies from good families." The implication was clear. Quentin fought to keep his expression neutral. "Perhaps we could discuss this over dinner at my home this evening," Thornton continued. "My wife and daughters would be delighted to meet the town's newest rancher. 7 o'clock. It was a test, Quentin realized. Thornton was offering him a choice: align with the town's established families or continue supporting the outsider. "I appreciate the invitation," Quentin said carefully, "but I have ranch business this evening. Another time, perhaps." Disappointment flickered across Thornton's face. "As you wish." "Good day, Mr. Galloway." As Quentin left the bank, he spotted Abigail crossing the street toward her shop. She wore a simple blue dress, her auburn hair caught in its usual practical knot, but something about the way she moved, purposeful yet graceful, caught his attention as it always did. She nodded politely when she saw him but didn't stop to chat. Later that afternoon, as Quentin was purchasing supplies at the general store, he overheard a conversation between the store owner and Mrs. Hollister. She was seen gathering plants with that Apache woman again, Mrs. Hollister was saying. "Out near Carrizo Canyon. My nephew followed them for her safety, you understand, and says they were performing some kind of ritual. Probably just collecting herbs," the store owner replied, sounding less convinced of wrongdoing. "In this town, we attend church for healing, not consort with heathens," Mrs. Hollister insisted. "Mark my words, she'll bring trouble down on all of us if something isn't done." Quentin had heard enough. He paid for his supplies and left, troubled by the escalating hostility toward Abigail. As he loaded his wagon, he noticed dark clouds gathering over the mountains. The air felt heavy with the promise of a summer storm. By the time he reached the ranch, the wind had picked up, bending the tall grasses in waves. His cowhands were securing equipment in preparation for the coming downpour. "Looks like a big one brewing, boss," called Hank, the older of the two hands, as he helped unload the supplies. "Might want to check that patch of roof we haven't fixed yet." Quentin nodded, glancing at the sky. "Let's get the horses in and the cattle moved to the north pasture. More shelter there." They worked quickly as the storm approached, thunder rumbling in the distance. Just as they finished, the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a deluge that forced them all to take shelter in the barn. "Never seen it come down this hard in June," commented Joe, the younger hand, wringing water from his hat. "Flash floods likely in the low country." Quentin frowned, thinking of Carrizo Canyon where Abigail had reportedly been earlier. The canyon was notorious for dangerous flash floods during summer storms. "How long does it usually take for the canyon to flood after a rain like this?" he asked. Hank shrugged. "Hour, maybe less if it's coming down hard up in the mountains." "Why?" Before Quentin could answer, they heard shouting from the direction of the house. Through the curtain of rain, they saw Clara's son David running toward the barn, soaked to the skin. "Mr. Galloway." The boy cried as he burst through the door. "It's Mrs. James. Mama sent me to find you. She didn't come back from the canyon and the creek's rising fast." Quentin's heart lurched. "When was she expected back?" "Before the storm," David panted. "Mama went to her shop when she didn't return, and Mr. Peterson said he saw her with the Apache woman near the canyon earlier. Mama's gone to tell the sheriff, but she said you might be able to help faster." Quentin was already moving, grabbing his slicker and a coil of rope. "Hank, saddle Thunder. Joe, prepare the medicine chest and extra blankets at the house. "David, you stay here where it's dry." "I want to help," the boy protested. "You already have," Quentin assured him. "Now I need you to wait here and tell your mother where I've gone when she arrives." Minutes later, Quentin was riding hard through the driving rain, Thunder's hooves throwing up mud as they galloped toward the canyon. The storm had intensified, lightning splitting the sky in jagged bursts, momentarily illuminating the treacherous path. He knew the risks. Flash floods were among the deadliest hazards in this territory, turning placid streams into raging torrents within minutes, if Abigail was still in the canyon. As he approached the canyon rim, Quentin could hear the roar of water even over the storm. He dismounted, securing Thunder to a sturdy juniper, and moved cautiously to the edge. What he saw made his blood run cold. The normally gentle creek at the canyon bottom had become a churning brown wall of water, debris, and uprooted trees. The water was rising rapidly, already covering the lower paths where people sometimes gathered herbs or hunted. "Abigail!" he shouted, his voice lost in the storm's fury. "Abigail!" Movement caught his eye, a flash of blue fabric on a rock ledge about halfway down the canyon wall, just above the rising water. Someone was huddled there, and nearby, a second figure in darker clothing waved frantically. Quentin scanned the canyon walls, looking for a way down. There was a game trail about 50 yards along the rim that switched back down to the ledge. Without hesitation, he grabbed his rope and began making his way toward it. The path was slick with mud, forcing him to move carefully despite his urgency. Twice he nearly lost his footing on the treacherous descent. When he finally reached the ledge, he found Abigail kneeling beside an elderly Apache woman who lay motionless on the stone. "Quentin." Abigail's face was streaked with rain and tears, her dress sodden and torn. "Nita fell. I think her leg is broken. I couldn't carry her up the path, and then the water started rising. We need to move quickly," Quentin interrupted, assessing the situation. The water was now just a few feet below their position and still rising. "Can you walk?" Abigail nodded. "Yes, but Nita, I'll carry her," Quentin said, already fashioning a harness from his rope. "But we can't go back the way I came. It's too steep and slippery now." He studied the canyon wall above them. There was a relatively flat area about 20 feet up that connected to another trail. If they could reach it, they might find a safer route out. Working swiftly, Quentin secured the Apache woman to his back, then turned to Abigail. "I'll go first. Watch where I place my hands and feet, then follow exactly. Don't look down." The climb was agonizing, made worse by the continuing rain and the weight of the injured woman on Quentin's back. Abigail followed without complaint, though he could see the fear in her eyes each time he glanced back to check her progress. When they finally reached the flat area, Quentin gently laid Nita down and helped Abigail onto solid ground. They were still dangerously exposed, but at least temporarily safe from the rising water. "The trail continues up there," Quentin pointed to a narrow path that wound up the canyon wall. "It's our best chance." Abigail touched Nita's forehead gently. "She's getting cold. We need to hurry." Quentin nodded, securing the elderly woman to his back once more. The next section of the climb was even more challenging, with the path sometimes disappearing entirely, forcing them to find handholds in the rock face. "Why were you in the canyon today?" Quentin asked as they paused briefly to catch their breath. "Nita was showing me where the yellow root grows," Abigail replied. "It helps with fever. Clara's daughter has been sick." Quentin nodded, struck again by the depth of her compassion despite the town's treatment of her. "We're almost to the top, just a little further." As they neared the rim, Quentin heard voices calling their names. Silhouetted against the stormy sky were several figures: Sheriff Donovan, Clara, and to his surprise, Mr. Peterson. "Here," Quentin shouted. "We need help. There's an injured woman." Hands reached down to help them up the last few feet. As soon as they were on solid ground, Clara wrapped a blanket around Abigail's shoulders while the sheriff and Peterson helped Quentin lay Nita on level ground. "The Apache settlement isn't far," Sheriff Donovan said. "Peterson, ride ahead and tell them we're bringing one of their elders. Mrs. Wilkins, take Mrs. James to town and get her warm." "I'm staying with Nita," Abigail insisted, her voice hoarse but determined. The sheriff looked like he might argue, but Quentin stepped in. "Mrs. James knows the woman's condition better than any of us. She should come." After a moment's hesitation, the sheriff nodded. "Fine. Let's move quickly before this storm gets worse." They fashioned a travois from branches and blankets, securing Nita as comfortably as possible before setting off toward the Apache settlement a few miles away. Quentin walked beside Abigail, offering his arm when the terrain grew difficult. "Thank you," she said quietly as they followed the others. "How did you know where to find us?" "David came to the ranch," Quentin explained. "Clara was worried when you didn't return." Abigail nodded, then asked hesitantly, "And you came immediately, without knowing what you might find?" Quentin looked at her, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "Of course I did." Their eyes held for a moment before she looked away, but not before he saw something soften in her expression. The Apache settlement received them with a mixture of caution and gratitude. Nita was quickly taken to a lodge where a medicine man examined her injury while Abigail explained what had happened. The tribe's leader, a dignified man named Strongbow, listened gravely before addressing the sheriff. "We thank you for bringing our elder home," he said in careful English. "And we thank the woman with the healing hands and the man with the brave heart." Sheriff Donovan shifted uncomfortably. "Just doing our duty. Now, if there's nothing else, we should head back to town before dark." As they prepared to leave, an elderly Apache woman approached Abigail, pressing something into her hand and speaking softly in her native language. Abigail replied in kind, tucking the small object into her pocket. On the journey back to White Oaks, the storm gradually subsided, leaving a washed-clean landscape under clearing skies. Peterson had ridden ahead, presumably to inform the town of their success. "Mrs. James," the sheriff said as they approached the outskirts of town, "I feel I should warn you. There's been talk." "There's always talk, Sheriff," Abigail replied wearily. "This is different. Thornton and some others are suggesting your association with the Apache poses a danger to the town. Today's incident won't help matters." Quentin felt anger rising. "She was helping an injured woman, Sheriff. How exactly is that dangerous to anyone?" "I'm just saying how some will see it," Donovan replied defensively. "Personally, I think you showed courage, Mrs. James, but not everyone will view it that way." As they entered town, people emerged from buildings to watch their muddy procession. Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. Mrs. Hollister stood on the boardwalk outside the general store, her expression disapproving as she took in Abigail's disheveled appearance and proximity to Quentin. Thornton pushed through the crowd, his daughters trailing behind him. "Sheriff, what happened?" Peterson said there was trouble at the canyon. Before Donovan could answer, Thornton's gaze fell on Abigail. "Mrs. James, once again you're at the center of a disturbance. Perhaps now you'll reconsider your unusual associations." Quentin felt Abigail stiffen beside him. Before he could intervene, Clara stepped forward. "Mr. Thornton, Mrs. James risked her life to help an elderly woman today," she said clearly. "If that's what you call a disturbance, then perhaps we should all be more disturbing." A murmur ran through the crowd, some nodding in agreement while others frowned. "Be that as it may," Thornton replied, "our town has standards of behavior. Mrs. James continues to flout those standards, consorting with Indians, practicing their heathen ways, and now placing herself in situations that require men to risk their lives for her rescue. "I didn't ask for rescue," Abigail said quietly, but with dignity. "And I would make the same choice again to help someone in need, regardless of their race or beliefs." "Well said," called a voice from the crowd, the general store owner, surprising everyone, including himself. Thornton's face reddened. "This isn't the place for such a discussion." "Sheriff, I expect a full report at tomorrow's town council meeting. Mrs. James, I'll be inspecting your premises tomorrow to ensure they meet the terms of your lease." As the crowd dispersed, Quentin walked Abigail to her shop, which also contained her small living quarters in the back. At the door, she turned to him, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "You should go. This has already caused enough gossip." Quentin shook his head. "I don't give a damn about gossip, Abigail." "You should," she replied softly. "You're building a life here. You need the town's goodwill for your ranch to succeed. Some things are more important than success." He reached out, gently tucking a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "Get some rest. I'll check on you tomorrow." She caught his hand before he could withdraw it, holding it briefly against her cheek. "Thank you, Quentin, for everything." That night, lying in his bed at the ranch, Quentin made a decision. He had spent too many years drifting, avoiding attachment out of fear of loss. But today, watching Abigail stand her ground against Thornton's accusations, he had recognized something in her that matched something in himself, a determination to live by one's own principles, regardless of the cost. The next morning, Quentin rode into town early, stopping first at the bank to speak with the manager, then at the land office to check some records. By the time he reached Abigail's shop, he had a plan. He found her sweeping glass from the boardwalk in front of her store, her expression grim but composed. "What happened?" he asked, dismounting quickly. "Someone threw a rock through the window last night," she explained, gesturing to the broken pane. "Not the first time, but certainly the most damage." Quentin surveyed the destruction, noting the rock with its attached paper lying inside the shop. "What does it say?" Abigail hesitated, then handed him the crumpled note. In crude lettering, it read, "Which go back to your savages." Anger surged through him. "Have you shown this to the sheriff?" "What would be the point?" Abigail asked, resuming her sweeping. "He can't prove who threw it, and half the town probably agrees with the sentiment." Quentin stepped closer. "Not half, maybe not even a quarter. Clara stood up for you yesterday. So did Jenkins from the store. People are starting to see through Thornton's manipulation." Abigail paused, a flicker of hope crossing her face before she tamped it down. "It doesn't matter. Thornton will be here this afternoon to inspect the premises. He'll find some violation of the lease and give me notice to vacate." "About that," Quentin said, "I have something to discuss with you. May I come in?" Inside, the shop was neat as always, though Abigail had placed a piece of cardboard over the broken window. She gestured for him to sit at the small table she used for cutting patterns, then busied herself making tea. "I visited the land office this morning," Quentin began. "Did you know this building was part of the original Harding property?" Abigail turned, surprise evident on her face. "No, I didn't. Harding sold the town lots separately from the ranch, but the deeds are connected. As the ranch owner, I have certain rights regarding the town properties that were originally part of the Harding estate." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "What are you saying, Quentin?" "I'm saying that I can contest Thornton's ownership of this building," he replied. "The sale was never properly recorded. At minimum, it would tie things up in court for months, during which time you couldn't be evicted." Abigail sat down slowly, her hands trembling slightly. "You would do that?" "Challenge one of the most powerful men in town. I would," Quentin confirmed. "But there's another option." He took a deep breath. "I could buy out Thornton's interest in the building, making me your landlord." She studied him, wariness replacing surprise. "And what would you expect in return?" The question stung, but Quentin understood her caution. "Nothing. You'd continue your business as before, with a lease for as long as you want at the same rate you're paying now. The only difference would be that Thornton couldn't threaten you anymore." "Why would you do this?" Abigail asked softly. Quentin met her gaze directly. "Because I've spent my life moving from place to place, never staying long enough to care about anyone or anything too deeply. Because when I came to White Oaks, I was looking for somewhere to belong, and instead, I found someone to belong with." The silence that followed was profound. Abigail looked down at her hands, then out the window at the town that had never fully accepted her. "Quentin," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The things they say about me are meaningless," he interrupted. "I know who you are, Abigail. I've seen your compassion, your courage, your integrity. The rest is just small-minded gossip." She smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "You make it sound so simple." "It can be," he replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Let me help, Abigail. Not because you need rescuing, but because sometimes even the strongest people deserve support." Before she could respond, the shop door opened, and Thornton entered, followed by Sheriff Donovan and Peterson. They stopped short at the sight of Quentin sitting at the table, still holding Abigail's hand. "Well," Thornton said coldly, "this explains a great deal." Quentin rose, positioning himself slightly in front of Abigail. "Mr. Thornton, we were just discussing business." "I'm sure you were," Thornton replied with a sneer. "Sheriff, note the broken window, a clear violation of the maintenance clause in Mrs. James's lease." "A window broken by vandals last night," Quentin countered. "Hardly Mrs. James's fault." "Nevertheless, terms are terms," Thornton insisted. "And speaking of terms, Mrs. James, your lease specifies that the premises are for business use only. It has come to my attention that you have been conducting other activities here, activities of a questionable nature." Abigail stood. "What are you implying, Mr. Thornton?" "Several reliable witnesses have reported seeing you prepare herbal concoctions using methods learned from the Apache," Thornton said. "This is not a medical establishment or an apothecary. It is a dress shop." "I occasionally prepare herbal remedies for friends," Abigail acknowledged. "There's nothing illegal or immoral about that." "Perhaps not illegal," Peterson interjected, "but certainly inappropriate for a respectable business district. My aunt was quite distressed to learn her dresses were being made in the same space where Indian potions are brewed." Quentin had heard enough. "Mr. Thornton, before you continue, there's something you should know. I've discovered some interesting information about the ownership of this building." He explained what he had learned at the land office, watching Thornton's expression shift from dismissive to concerned. "That's preposterous," Thornton spluttered when Quentin finished. "I've owned this building for 5 years." "Without proper title," Quentin replied calmly. "I've already spoken with Judge Parker about the matter. He's very interested in reviewing the documentation." Sheriff Donovan looked uncomfortable. "Is this true, Thornton? Is there a problem with the title?" "Nonsense," Thornton insisted, though less confidently. "Galloway is bluffing." "Am I?" Quentin removed a folded document from his pocket. "This is a copy of the original deed showing the building as part of the Harding estate, with no record of proper transfer to you. The judge was quite clear about what this means." Peterson stepped forward. "Mr. Thornton, perhaps we should consult your attorney before proceeding." Thornton's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is outrageous. You're conspiring to undermine my legitimate business interests because of what?" some misplaced affection for this woman. Not misplaced at all, Quentin replied evenly. In fact, I have a proposal for you, Mr. Thornton. I'm prepared to buy this building from you at fair market value, resolving the title issue without involving the courts. And if I refuse, Thornton demanded, then we let Judge Parker decide. But I suspect that once he starts looking into this property, he might become curious about your other holdings as well. The implication hung in the air. After a tense moment, Thornton straightened his jacket. Very well. Have your lawyer contact mine. But understand this, Galloway, you've made a powerful enemy today. I understand completely, Quentin replied, unmoved, after Thornton stalked out, followed by a confused-looking Peterson. Sheriff Donovan lingered. That was quite a performance, Galloway, he said quietly. I hope you know what you're doing. Protecting what matters, Quentin replied. Something I learned in the war, Sheriff. Some things are worth fighting for. Donovan nodded slowly. Just watch your back. Thornton has influence beyond White Oaks. When they were alone again, Abigail turned to Quentin. Did you really speak with Judge Parker? Quentin grinned. No, but I did verify the deed issue at the land office. The rest was intuition. A laugh bubbled up from Abigail's throat, the first true laugh he had heard from her. You're either very brave or very foolish, Quentin Galloway. Probably both, he admitted, drawing closer to her. Abigail, I meant what I said before they interrupted us. I want to help, but more than that, I want to be part of your life. She looked up at him, vulnerability and hope warring in her expression. People will talk. They'll say you've taken up with damaged goods. Quentin cupped her face in his hands. Then I'll tell them you're the answer to my prayers. And he bent to kiss her, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. In the weeks that followed, White Oaks buzzed with gossip about Quentin Galloway's purchase of Abigail James's shop building and their increasingly public courtship. Thornton and his allies continued their campaign of disapproval, but found their influence waning as more townspeople, impressed by Quentin's stand and Abigail's quiet dignity, began to rethink their prejudices. Clara and her children became frequent visitors to the ranch, where Quentin was building an addition to the house and expanding the cattle operation. Abigail divided her time between her shop in town and helping with the ranch improvements, bringing her knowledge of natural materials and practical design to the project. The Apache tribe, grateful for the assistance with Nita, who recovered from her broken leg, began trading more openly with Quentin. Strong Bow himself visited the ranch, establishing a relationship that would benefit both the tribe and the ranch in the years to come. By late summer, the scandal had largely subsided, replaced by anticipation of the town's annual harvest festival. On a golden afternoon in early September, Quentin found Abigail in the garden behind the ranch house, picking tomatoes for dinner. You know, he said, leaning against the fence, people are starting to wonder when we'll make things official. Abigail straightened, pushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Are they now? Clara mentioned that Mrs. Peterson, not the awful aunt, but Peterson's mother asked if we'd set a date yet. He moved into the garden, taking the basket from her hands and setting it aside. I told her we were taking our time. Wise answer, Abigail replied, though her eyes betrayed her interest. We've only known each other a few months. Long enough to know what matters, Quentin said, taking her hands in his. Long enough for me to be certain that I love you, Abigail James. Her breath caught. Quentin. I'm not asking for an answer today, he continued. Just want you to know where I stand. I've wandered long enough, found what I was looking for right here. Abigail's eyes glistened with unshed tears. The town is just beginning to accept me. If we rushed into marriage, forget the town, Quentin interrupted gently. What do you want, Abigail? She looked around at the ranch house, the garden, the distant mountains bathed in afternoon light. Then her gaze returned to his face, steady and certain. "You," she said simply. "I want you this life we're building. I've been alone too long, guarded too much." She squeezed his hands. "I love you too, Quentin, more than I thought possible after everything." He pulled her close, kissing her with all the emotion he'd held in check for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he said, "Then marry me. Not for the town's approval or to silence gossip. Marry me because we belong together." Abigail laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Yes, yes, I will." They were married in October in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Clara stood as Abigail's witness while Hank supported Quentin. To everyone's surprise, many townspeople attended, including Sheriff Donovan, the general store owner and his wife, and even Mrs. Peterson, who declared the bride absolutely radiant despite her simple dress. Thornton and his circle were notably absent, but their absence only highlighted how much had changed in White Oaks since Quentin's arrival. The town was evolving, growing beyond its narrow prejudices, though that growth would take years and face many setbacks. After the guests departed, Quentin and Abigail stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors no artist could capture. "Happy?" Quentin asked, his arm around his wife's waist. Abigail leaned into him, a contentment in her expression that had been absent when they first met. "More than I ever thought possible. You know, for years they called me damaged goods." "Their loss," Quentin replied, kissing the top of her head. "I knew the truth from the start." "And what was that?" she asked, turning in his arms to face him. "That you were exactly what I'd been searching for my whole life," he said. "The answer to prayers I didn't even know I was making." 2 years later, on a spring morning much like the one when they first met, Abigail woke Quentin with news that left him speechless with joy. By Christmas, their son James Samuel Galloway had joined them, followed 2 years later by daughter Elizabeth Clara. The town of White Oaks grew and changed with the times. Thornton eventually sold his businesses and moved to Santa Fe, his influence replaced by more progressive leaders. Abigail's shop expanded to include a proper apothecary section, where she openly practiced the herbal knowledge she had gained from her Apache friends, teaching a new generation of women to value both traditional wisdom and modern medicine. Clara's children grew up alongside the Galloway children, David eventually becoming Quentin's ranch foreman and Emma apprenticing with Abigail before opening her own shop in a neighboring town. The Galloway ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the territory for its fair dealings with both settlers and native tribes. Quentin and Abigail faced challenges: droughts, economic downturns, political conflicts, but they faced them together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard with Clara's grandchildren, Abigail turned to Quentin, lines of experience now etched around her still bright eyes. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Standing up to the town for me? Risking everything you'd come here to build?" Quentin took her hand, running his thumb over the simple gold band he'd placed there a decade earlier. "Not for a single moment," he replied. "Best decision I ever made." Abigail leaned her head against his shoulder, watching as James showed little Elizabeth how to pet a new calf. Who would have thought, all those years ago, that the widow with the strange ways and the newcomer rancher would end up here? "I did," Quentin said with certainty. "From the moment I walked into your shop, covered in trail dust and needing my shirts mended." "Liar," she laughed, the sound as joyful as it had been the day she accepted his proposal. "You were just looking for decent curtains." "I was looking for home," he corrected, drawing her closer. "And I found it, right where I least expected. With the woman the town called damaged goods, but who turned out to be everything I ever needed. As the sun set over the New Mexico mountains, painting the ranch in gold and crimson, they sat together in the contentment of a love that had defied convention, overcome prejudice, and built something lasting and true in a place where neither had expected to find belonging. In White Oaks, people still sometimes told the story of the stubborn widow and the equally stubborn rancher who had changed the town as much as it had changed them. And though the details varied depending on who was telling the tale, the ending was always the same: two people who found in each other not just love, but the courage to stand against the tide of small-minded prejudice and create the life they both deserved.